Shalom and happy Chanukah. This week we are reading Parashat Miketz, the Torah portion beginning in Genesis chapter 41. Last week, in Parashat Vayeshev, we touched upon a level of meaning regarding the annual confluence of Chanukah with the Torah portions of Yosef. The deepest themes of Yosef's identity and essence and Chanukah are intertwined. We recall that at the conclusion of last week's portion, Vayeshev, Yosef was languishing in prison on fictitious charges that were instigated by his master Potiphar's wife. By the way, she has a first name, even though it is not mentioned explicitly in the verses, but our tradition has it that her name is Zulicha. She was a sexual predator, and Yosef was actually the victim of Zulicha's sexual harassment. Yosef correctly interpreted the dreams of his prison mates, the chamberlain of the bakers and the chamberlain of the cupbearers. The chamberlain of the bakers was hung, and the chamberlain of the cupbearers was freed from prison and returned to his position. As Parashat Vayeshev came to a conclusion, Yosef seems to have been hoping that the chamberlain of the cupbearers would put in a good word for him and help him to facilitate his release. Now don't go thinking that Yosef thought that anyone but Hashem could help him. He didn't put all his trust in this person, but he was, in a way, limiting Hashem by putting his hopes in Hashem, using this person exclusively to help him. Yosef said to him, "If only you would think of me with yourself when he," meaning Pharaoh, "benefits you, and you will do me a kindness, if you please, and mention me to Pharaoh, then you would take me out of this building. For indeed, I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing for them to have put me in a pit." But, as we read, the chamberlain of the cupbearers did not remember Yosef, but he forgot him. Now, of course, Yosef got to Egypt in the first place because it was God's plan, but ostensibly he got down there as a result of his feud with his brothers, the holy sons of Yaakov, the tribes of Israel, even though their argument was concerning the proper path in serving God, a noble cause indeed, but still Yosef wasn't a completely innocent party in that dispute. The Midrash states that on account of the Lashon Hara, the tale-bearing that Yosef spoke about his brothers, again back in Vayeshev chapter 37, verse 1, the very first verse we read, Yosef would bring evil reports about them to their father. On account of this, the Midrash states, Yosef deserved to be in prison for 10 years. But because he said to the chamberlain of the cupbearers, I really like saying chamberlain of the cupbearers, he said, "Remember me." So because of that, 2 additional years were added to his sentence. And all told, Yosef had been in prison for 12 years, as our portion Miketz opens with the words, "It happened at the end of 2 years to the day." This was at the conclusion of the additional 2 years. But again, if there's one thing that we learn over and over again from the story of Yosef, it's that there is so much more than meets the eye. That not only is there 2 sides to a story, but there are many more sides because it's Hashem's story, it's God's story. So he is the orchestrator here, and he sees things in a different way. Something important to remember as the stories of our own lives continue to unfold. We may think something is happening here, but we may not know what it is. It might be going a certain way for the reasons that we think, but Hashem has other plans. So for example, on the one hand, the Midrash expounds upon the extra 2 years that were added on Yosef's sentence, as I just mentioned, because of his plea to the chamberlain. But compare that with another statement made by the very same sages, and they say, why were 2 years added to Yosef's prison term? So that at the appointed time, when Pharaoh was going to have that dream, Yosef would rise to greatness on that account. So you see, there's always 2 sides. Now speaking of sides, like his great-grandfather Avraham, Yosef is known as a Hebrew, an Ivri, which literally means from the other side. Avraham was from the other side of the river, but actually he was on the other side of the whole idolatrous world. Being an Ivri means, I'm not from around here. I don't fit in with all this. Just look at the UN. So it has been, and so it goes. So Mrs. Potiphar, Zulicha, she says, look, he brought us a Hebrew man to mock us. Chapter 39, verse 14. How did she know he was a Hebrew? Because Yosef was always telling everyone. Like he told the chamberlain while he was yet in prison. He said, for indeed I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews. Now, the chamberlain of the cupbearers, he was there too, amongst all the other chamberlains, when a perplexed and overwrought Pharaoh comes a day when he was relating his disturbing dream to all his servants, and this Oberfuhrer, who owed everything to Yosef, now, even in describing him to Pharaoh, even in praising him, he tried to put Yosef down. He says, a lad, a Hebrew, a slave. But all of a sudden, in one moment, this nice Jewish boy, a slave boy, mind you, all of a sudden, Pharaoh hands his pinball crown to him. He says, you got my attention. Whoa, Nobel Prize. You get a Nobel Prize in several categories. In dream interpretation, and more importantly, in economic planning. But little did they know, somehow they felt it, that his true prize was in a brand of righteousness that they'd never seen. See, Yosef was really something. The sages consider the question, is it possible that Yosef, a youth, 17 years old, standing in all the heat and passion of youth, is it possible that he restrained himself? What did they answer? Take a look at the book of Bereshit and start reading. You have the story of Reuven and Bilhah. You have the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Adults, and the Torah does not hide their flaws, but frankly exposes their mistakes and foibles. Yosef, he was young, without restraint. How much more so can we believe the testimony of the Torah? Yosef is about adding. He's about adding something extra, extra holiness to life by subduing the physical passions of the body. Not because I can't, not because I am not tempted, but because I don't want to. I want to elevate myself to Hashem. And that, friends, is exactly the story of Hanukkah and the battle between Israelite and Hellenistic culture. But from whence comes the power to go that extra mile? We find the following amazing statement in the Midrash regarding the honors that were given to Yosef. Our sages teach, all that was given to Yosef, mishelo natnu. That means it was his own. They gave him from his own. The great honor that was given him was his own achievements. In other words, he reaped according to his own doing, his own accomplishment, his own acquisition. The sages further expound and explain their intention. They say, the mouth, his mouth that was tempted to kiss and sin but never did. What do we find? Chapter 41:40. And through your command, literally through your mouth, the verse says, all my people shall be nourished. His body that never touched in sin. Pharaoh says, and he had attired him with raiment of fine linen. So too, he never had a sinful thought. And they called out before him, this is the king's patron, appointing him over the entire land of Egypt. And this midrash goes through every part of him. His heart that didn't have desire, his legs, his hands. What's this all about? Open up your heart in the deepest way. One of our great rabbis explained it in the following manner. He says, the midrash is foreshadowing a question. That after all, we have a principle in Torah that there's not necessarily, in fact, there isn't any reward for mitzvot in this world. So how is it that Yosef was so rewarded? And the Midrash answers, Yosef wasn't rewarded per se, he was given of his own. What does that mean? This is the deepest thing in the world. See, mitzvot that a person accomplishes, they don't belong to the person who accomplishes them, because we're only able to do anything in this world through divine aid. So that's why we make a blessing, that Hashem commanded us to do this thing, because the command helps us to accomplish the mitzvah. Now that's in regard to mitzvot aseh, to performing positive commandments that involve taking initiative and action. But holding oneself back from transgressing negative commandments, holding oneself back from pursuing, for example, something illicit, that is the individual pursuit of a man. An ordinary reward is not applicable to this. This is extraterritorial and immeasurable. Standing up to a test is the full measure of a man, and brings about not just an award, but transcendence. And between us, that's why Yosef's brothers didn't recognize him. There's a very deep lesson here that we learn from Yosef tzadik, the righteous Yosef, which applies to all of us. What a person does in our struggle to give of ourselves, for a person to overcome himself to Hashem's will, in order to nullify his will that he could do Hashem's will, that is coming from a place, a realm, it's called Mishalo, it's his own. Doing good deeds is only possible because Hashem helps us. But preventing oneself, stopping oneself and overcoming desire, that's called his own. That's a person's own accomplishment, and the measure of a person's own greatness and something that the individual owns. So Yosef, Mishalon natnu lo. He was given what was his. Yosef means he will add. His attribute is an extra measure, an extra level of holiness. Such a person has power and is given more power. To subdue oneself properly for Hashem changes the world. Because before such a person, as was the case with Yosef, then the whole world, all of nature, are automatically subdued before him. Because the deepest innate desire of all creation is to be subjugated before Hashem's will. And the whole world will follow suit after a person who truly rises to become a man. Because when we are ready to own up to our own humanity, and when we own it and surpass it, which is doable, but it comes from a very personal place. For one person to withstand a test, all of creation is validated. It's these inner things that count for so much. Unlike the Greek way, the real work in a life of Torah is about what can't be seen, and what needs to be fixed not on the outside, but on the inside. And that too is the message of Hanukkah, a joyous Hanukkah full of light and love to all.